In the autumn of 1757, on a rain-soaked mango grove near the village of Placé, a private trading company defeated the army of a king. Not a nation, not an empire, a corporation, chartered by merchants, funded by shareholders, answerable to a boardroom in London. Its soldiers wore uniforms paid for by dividends. Its cannons were purchased on balance sheets. And when the smoke cleared over Bengal, a business had seized the wealthiest province in India. This is the story of how a single company, born to trade in pepper and silk, raised its own army of 200,000 men, deposed kings, minted its own coins, and ruled over a fifth of humanity. It is the most audacious corporate expansion in history. And a warning about what happens when profit is given the power to make war. It began, as empires often do, with a spice. In 1600, a group of London merchants petitioned Queen Elizabeth for a monopoly on trade with the East Indies. The lure was pepper, cloves, and nutmeg, commodities worth more than gold in European markets. The Crown granted them a royal charter, exclusive rights to all English commerce east of the Cape of Good Hope. This was the East India Company, and from birth it was a strange hybrid, part business, part sovereign entity. The charter allowed it not only to trade, but to make treaties, wage war, and administer justice in foreign lands. No one imagined a merchant venture would ever need such powers. But the language was there, dormant in the founding documents, waiting for ambitious men to discover exactly what a corporation could become, when nobody stopped it. The early decades were precarious. Dutch competitors dominated the Spice Islands, and the company was often outgunned and outmaneuvered. So its directors pivoted away from the contested spice trade and toward the vast, fractured markets of the Indian subcontinent. Here they found textiles, fine cotton, silk, and calico that European consumers craved. The company established trading posts called factories along the coast: Surat, Madras, Bombay, Calcutta. Each was a fortified warehouse, and crucially, each needed defending. To protect its goods, the company began hiring soldiers. At first, a handful of guards, then garrisons, then regiments. The logic was seductive and self-justifying. Every armed man protected the profits, and every profit funded more armed men. The merchant venture was quietly, almost accidentally, arming itself into a military power. The subcontinent the company entered was not empty. It was ruled by the Mughal Empire, one of the richest and most sophisticated states on earth, generating perhaps a quarter of global economic output. But by the early 1700s, that empire was fracturing. Regional governors, called nawabs, grew semi-independent. Succession wars drained the treasury. Rival European powers, the French especially, played the factions against each other. Into this chaos stepped a new breed of company man, not a merchant, but a soldier administrator who understood that in a collapsing order, the entity with the best organized force could dictate terms. The company had that force, disciplined, drilled in European tactics, and increasingly composed of Indian soldiers called sepoys. Its private army began to look less like a security detail and more like an instrument of conquest. Enter the archetype of this era, the ambitious clerk who became a conqueror. Men like Robert Clive arrived in India as low-level accountants, chasing fortune to escape debt and obscurity. They discovered a place where a bold, ruthless individual could accumulate wealth beyond imagination. Clive proved a gifted, cold-blooded commander. When the Nawab of Bengal, Alarmed by company fortifications seized Calcutta in 1756, the company struck back. But what followed at Plassey in 1757 was not a battle so much as a purchase. Clive bribed the Nawab's chief general, Mir Jafar, promising him the throne in exchange for betrayal on the battlefield. The Nawab's army, vast on paper, simply refused to fight. The company won by corrupting the enemy's leadership. It was corporate strategy applied to warfare, and it worked spectacularly. Plassey changed everything. The company installed its puppet, Mir Jafar, as Nawab, and in return extracted staggering payments, millions of pounds flowing into company coffers and the private pockets of its officers. Clive alone took a fortune worth over £200,000, an almost incomprehensible sum. But the true prize came in 1765, when the Mughal emperor, weakened and dependent, granted the company the Diwani, the right to collect taxes across Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa. In a single stroke of the pen, a trading company became the tax authority of 30 million people. It now controlled the revenue of the richest region in India. The business no longer needed to trade for profit. It could simply collect it, at gunpoint, from an entire subcontinent's population. The corporation had become a government. What followed was one of history's great cautionary tales about unchecked extraction. The company ran Bengal not for its people, but for its shareholders. It squeezed the peasantry with brutal taxes, monopolized grain, and diverted resources to fund its expansion and dividends. When the monsoon failed in 1769, the consequences were catastrophic. The Bengal famine of 1770 killed an estimated 10 million people, perhaps a third of the population. The company continued collecting taxes throughout, even raising them, prioritizing revenue over survival. Grain that might have fed the starving was hoarded or exported. It was corporate governance stripped of any duty of care, a business optimizing for extraction, while a civilization died around it. And in London, the shareholders continued to receive their dividends, largely indifferent to the human cost. The famine and the obscene wealth of returning company officers, mockingly called nabobs, sparked scandal back home. These men returned to England, flaunting fortunes, buying estates and parliamentary seats, distorting British politics with Indian gold. Critics asked uncomfortable questions. How could a company govern millions? Who authorized this private empire? Meanwhile, the company's finances were a paradox. Enormous territorial revenue, yet crushing debt from constant warfare and rampant corruption. In 1772, teetering on bankruptcy, the mighty conglomerate begged the British government for a bailout. The irony was extraordinary. The corporation that ruled Bengal could not balance its own books. Parliament rescued it, but at a price. The beginning of state oversight. The Regulating Act of 1773 was the first crack in the company's independence, the moment the government began to reclaim what it had recklessly delegated. Yet the company's expansion did not slow. It accelerated. Through the late 1700s and early 1800s, under aggressive governors-general, its private army marched across the subcontinent. It fought the Marathas, the Mysore sultans, the Sikhs. It annexed territory through war and through the cynical doctrine of lapse, seizing any princely state whose ruler died without a natural heir. By the 1820s, the company's army numbered 250,000 soldiers, larger than the standing army of Britain itself. It administered courts, built roads, printed currency, and collected taxes across an area of hundreds of millions of people. a corporation had become the de facto sovereign of India. No business before or since has wielded such raw territorial power over so many human lives. But empires built on extraction and force accumulate resentment, and in 1857 the reckoning came. The immediate spark was cultural. New rifle cartridges, rumored to be greased with cow and pig fat, offensive to Hindu and Muslim sepoys alike. But the deeper cause was decades of humiliation, broken promises, and contempt for the people the company ruled. The sepoys, the very Indian soldiers who had built the empire, rose in rebellion. The uprising spread across northern India in a wave of violence and vengeance on both sides. It took the company over a year and immense brutality to suppress it. The rebellion revealed the fundamental fragility of the entire enterprise. An empire held by a mercenary army could be lost the moment that army turned against its paymasters. The rebellion was the corporation's death sentence. The British government could no longer tolerate the fiction that a private company should rule an empire of millions and command an army capable of shaking the world. In 1858, Parliament passed the Government of India Act, dissolving the company's political power and transferring its territories, its army, and its administration directly to the Crown. The era of the Raj began. The company itself lingered as a hollow commercial entity for a few more years before being formally dissolved in 1874. The greatest corporation in history, a business that had conquered a subcontinent, deposed emperors, and governed a fifth of mankind, ended not with a battle, but with a bureaucratic act, quietly wound down like any other failed venture. The legacy of the East India Company is impossible to overstate. It pioneered the joint stock corporation, the very structure of modern business. It demonstrated the terrifying potential of a company empowered to make war and govern territory in pursuit of profit. Its rule reshaped the subcontinent's economy, deindustrializing a region that had once produced a quarter of the world's textiles, and its extraction contributed to centuries of poverty and famine. But above all, it stands as history's ultimate warning about the fusion of commerce and sovereign power, about what happens when the pursuit of shareholder returns is armed with cannons and granted the authority to rule. It was never meant to be an empire. It became one anyway, because no one drew the line until it was far too late. If this story of ambition, conquest, and corporate power gripped you, then you belong here. On Magnates and Monopolies, we dive deep into the empires built by ruthless ambition, the tycoons who bent nations to their will, the monopolies that reshaped the world, and the spectacular downfalls that followed. History's greatest business wars were fought with more cunning and ruthlessness than any battlefield, and we tell them the way they deserve to be told. So subscribe, turn on notifications, and join us as we explore the rise and fall of the titans who understood that fortune favors the bold and the merciless. Next time, another empire, another reckoning. The boardroom, after all, has always been the true field of conquest. We'll see you there.